What's up, everybody? BigSweetC here with you. Got a special video for you today. As we close out 2024, I want to give you my top 5 games that we played this year. Before we do get started, I do just kind of want to give you a quick reminder of the qualifications for said games. Rule number 1, it can't be something that I've already played. So if, like Chrono Trigger, if I was to play like an emulator of that game, that wouldn't count because I played it a long time ago. Um, Now, stipulation on that, remakes can qualify if it's a significantly different game, just like we had Resident Evil 4 last year, was one of my top 5 because that was different enough that it felt like a new game. Remasters probably not going to qualify because they're usually just an HD picture quality, graphical quality upgrade. So those wouldn't count because they wouldn't be significantly different games. Um, and 2, I had to start and finish said game in 2024. So we've had a couple of games before where we started one year, we didn't finish to the next, and they didn't qualify. These are specifically games that I started in 2024 for the first time and finished in the same year. Having said the ground rules, I do have a couple of honorable mentions. Skyward Sword, the HD remaster for the Nintendo Switch. Absolutely loved playing this game again. But because of rule number 1, this was just an HD remaster. It wasn't an actually significantly different game. It was totally the same as when I played it back on the Nintendo Wii, so it doesn't count because I had already played it. Shadow of the Erdtree, the DLC for one of my favorite games from a couple of years ago, Elden Ring. Again, it is not a standalone game. You have to progress significantly into the story of Elden Ring before you can actually access the DLC. So because it is not a standalone game, DLC does not count. I don't care what the Game Awards say. The Game Awards are dumb. And finally, Grounded. I absolutely loved playing Grounded again. I haven't played it in a few years, but it is another game that I had played before. I know when I played it originally, it wasn't a finished game. We were able to come back and finish it this year, but it was a game that I had already played. And it was most likely, I should have gone and checked before I did this video, but I didn't. It was most likely one of my top 5 a couple of years ago, so it wouldn't qualify for this year, simply because we had played it before. Having said all that, it is now time to get into our top 5. We will start with number 5. That is going to be Final Fantasy V, the Pixel Remaster. I had never gotten a chance to play this game before because it wasn't originally released here in the United States. And I absolutely loved giving it a go when we went through our Pixel remasters. It's got a great story with Bart and Galif and all the crazy characters. There's the 3 different worlds. It introduces the Blue Mage to the Final Fantasy story. Anybody who's been watching the channel for a while now knows that Final Fantasy is probably my favorite franchise of all time. Definitely one of my top 2 or 3. And to be able to finally go back and play such a gem of a game, this really, going through there and playing it, you could definitely tell that most of the future Final Fantasy games after 5 really did take a liking. Whoever created 5, the director of 5, really inspired the rest of the franchise. Again, not just with the job classes, but the Blue Mage was a great one for me because it was the first time you could learn enemy attacks and stuff. But the idea of the story behind it, where you have this one world, then there's this completely different world, and then they merge together to create a new world. You see it in 6 with the World of Balance and the World of Ruin. You see it in Final Fantasy 9 with Gaia and Terra. It was just a great chance to finally play one of the traditional Japanese RPGs that I had never got to play as a young man. And so I really enjoyed Final Fantasy V. Number 4 is one of the Dark Pictures anthologies. It's the 4th one in the group, The Devil in Me. Now, again, another, if you followed the channel for a while, I'm not huge on horror games. Matter of fact, I specifically stayed away from most of them for a very long time in my life, outside of a couple of Resident Evil games here and there. But when I was introduced to the Dark Pictures anthology with Man of Medan first one, I was immediately hooked in the way that game played out, and I've enjoyed absolutely every one that I've played. But this fourth one, The Devil in Me, stood out specifically because of the setting that it was in. You're in this creepy, beautiful looking hotel that isn't really a hotel. It's actually this former insane asylum, it looks like, that has been converted to look like a hotel with a great historical background. It takes place on Lake Michigan, place I used to go to a lot. Now, it isn't in Michigan, it's in Chicago, but it takes place in an area that I'm very familiar with. I grew up in that area. And it's got a TV crew background, which is what I started my professional career in. There's this documentary going on. They're trying to tell the history of this crazy murderer, and you get stuck into this story about a guy who's trying to be a copycat of that killer, of the first ever serial killer. And it was just told very brilliantly. What I liked most about it, though, was not like the other games. Yes, there were moral choices and moral dilemmas in the other games before, but this one specifically forced you to choose between saving one character or another in multiple instances. Now, depending on how you picked who to save and what to do, you were able to maybe save both of them if you could. But it was the first one that I can remember where I actually had to choose, okay, I'm going to kill off this character and choose to have this character live instead. And that really upped the ante for me. It was more than just escaping death. It was actually choosing the characters that you like more than anything. It did remind me a little bit of Until Dawn, because you do kind of play favorites in that game. But this one specifically was like, okay, who am I going to choose here? Because I've got to pick one, or they're both going to die. And so that extra moral obligation, that moral dilemma that you face, really made this one stand out. Again, along with the setting of the hotel, being on Lake Michigan, and the TV crew documentary background with it. Number 3 was a little bit of a surprise to me. Life is Strange 3 True Colors was an absolutely brilliant game. But I say I'm surprised by this one because I'm not going to lie, the reviews and the word of mouth on this game were not that great. Like, it was one of those games that kind of, I think, got caught up in the woke mind virus hype. And so you had half the people didn't like the game because it was pushing an agenda. The other people didn't like the game because you had to play as this female character, which, if you'd ever played any the first Life is Strange, you played as a female character. Now, it doesn't bother me if you're forced to play as a female. That's not the issue with me. But I do have an issue with being forced to accept an ideology, a narrative that I don't agree with, and it tends to have me not look favorably on your game storytelling. But was not like this was not like that at all. I thought Alex Chen was a fantastic character who was really discovering who she was. And you didn't have to go down the lesbian or the heterosexual path if you didn't want to. It gave you the option to decide. And there really wasn't a whole lot about anything other than just who this lady is going forward. Now, that's just a side part of it that helps you set up the story, which is one of probably my favorite stories in the Life is Strange trilogy. Now, I know there's the fourth one. I haven't played it yet, but in the first one, you have this setting where you're trying to save this city, and then you have the dilemma: do I save my friend or do I save the city? The second one, you have the two boys that are running from the law because they got into a little bit of trouble, and they're, maybe they get deported, maybe they don't. But this one, to me, really stood out because it was generally about something that I know and have experienced. You have a small town area that's very rich, and the people know each other and they love each other. But it's basically supported and propped up by this corporation that has been sucking them dry, whether the people notice or not. And so you run into this issue where, Alex Chen's older brother, who they haven't seen each other in 8 years since one got adopted from the orphanage and the other did not, they have this awkward kind of get to know each other moment. And then as soon as they start to get to know one each other, start to kind of lower their defenses against one another, the older brother is just up and mysteriously gone. And so it leads into this detective story to find out what happened to the brother, which then leads you into this history of this town, only to realize that this town is not the clean cut society that you have been led to believe. And so I think the way Square was able to set up the story, the setting, the characters, the way that it played out, and it kept unraveling this mystery, if you will, I thought was really, really good, actually. And I enjoyed it a lot. I think it's probably my favorite of the three I've played. Although, I mean, the first one is really good. The second one's good too, but this third one really surprised me a lot. And I think a lot of the surprise was I was not beat over the head with this LGBTQCIA ideology that I was expecting to see because of all the backlash when the game first came out. So, not only was it a great story, not only was it fun characters to play as, but it was also totally different than what I was expecting, which made it even better. Into number two, our runner-up of Game of the Year for me, Black Myth Wukong was absolutely phenomenal. I liked this game basically start to finish. It was one of those things where I didn't know much about it. It kind of came out of nowhere to me. I had heard about the game maybe a couple of weeks to no longer than a month before the game dropped. But again, here we go into the woke ideology stuff. All I heard about this game was how there wasn't any strong female characters, how it was bland, how the storytelling was blah at best, and how it really pushed this misogynistic type game, only to have played it and found out that it does actually have quite a few very strong female characters in it. They're just not the female type of characters that a certain type of person wants in their video games and kind of forces on Western audiences. And I think that's part of the breath of the fresh air is it wasn't created by a Western developer. It was created by a fairly new company, somebody I'd never heard of, Game Science, and it was based on a Chinese mythology that I knew almost nothing about other than this brief cartoon that my wife showed me when we had heard about this game, Black Myth Wukong. Now, the way the game played out, when you're first buying it, they kind of tell you that it's a lot along lines of a Dark Souls or a Sekiro or a Bloodborne type of game. It's really more like God of War to me in the terms of it's not really like a block and slash or a dodge and attack type of game. It's really more of like button combos and knowing when to attack and when not to attack. It's there's a lot of light attack, strong attack, and but you do have the magic spells and stuff. It reminded me a lot more gameplay wise of God of War than it did, or Spider-Man for that matter, than it did with like Dark Souls or Sekiro. But it was still super fun to play. The progression of the story was incredible in my opinion. Like it kind of has these three chapters, this arc, if you will, sets you up. Kind of at first, the enemies are fairly easy to defend against. They're fairly easy to beat. They don't have a whole lot of life. They don't have a whole lot of move sets. They typically do the same things. They don't necessarily spot you and come at you as much. And then you kind of get about a third of the way through the game, maybe a little bit farther, and they start testing you a little bit. Now you're starting to get cluttered by more mobs. Some of the enemies have fairly more move sets that are a little bit more complicated, a little longer in sequence than little harder to be a little better disguised than the beginning of the game. And then by the end of the game, you get to a point where the game just basically takes the training wheels off and says, "Have at it, Hoss. I hope you know how to play this game." And then there's plenty of bosses that are absolutely phenomenal gameplay bosses. The Great Sage comes to mind. The Scorpion Lord comes to mind. Duskvale comes to mind. Erlong, the deity, comes to mind. There were a bunch of fights that I really enjoyed, and even the second playthrough, I liked as much, if not more, than the first time I played them. The story was very cool. You have this guy who's not really the legend, so to speak of, but he's going through this same journey, trying to reincarnate this guy that everybody has come to know and love, and is, looked down upon by the celestial court that he used to be a part of because he's this rambunctious monkey. And so you at every moment, the gods are trying to stop you from fulfilling this journey, and you keep getting stronger, you keep getting better, and you go through some of the most amazing worlds. You've got the Webbed Hollow, which, I mean, feels like you're in a spider's nest. You've got the Flaming Mountains, which is basically, you look like you look like you're on Dothamer from Star Wars. Like, it's just a great game with a bunch of great gameplay and a bunch of phenomenal bosses. You've got secret areas that you can easily miss. There's a bunch of enemies that are secret enemies that you can easily miss. And so it was just a really good game overall. Now, having said all that, the reason that it's not my favorite game is, even though it was a fantastic game that kind of took me by surprise because I hadn't heard a whole lot about it, it didn't really stand out in terms of pushing the envelope and moving the genre forward. And so it was pretty basic to its formula. Even though it progressed very well, it didn't deviate much from the action RPG formula. The story didn't really push any boundaries. While it was about a very interesting character, that interesting character didn't have any significant differences from the mythology, which made it, kind of nuanced and new and original. Not to say that this wasn't an original game, but it's not like it was Tears of the Kingdom, where it really took the Zelda franchise in a completely different direction, where you're able to like make living machinery and stuff like that. This, and the other hand, it was very much in kin to, again, God of War, where you kind of expected all of the same stuff to kind of happen, and there was no real part where it was like, wow, this is new for this action adventure type of genre. And so it was still a great game, but because it didn't move me into a new direction in terms of the genre, I think is what keeps it from taking that number one spot, which we'll get to now. And I've said this pretty much all year long. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was definitely my favorite game played this year in 2024. It was absolutely phenomenal, and it fits the rules because this was completely different than the original Final Fantasy VII, which is a traditional turn-based JRPG. This has turn-based JRPG elements in it if you want to play that way, but it's basically an action RPG in the way that the gameplay plays out. But the synergy moves that we were originally introduced to kind of in the intermission DLC from Remake, this makes a huge comeback, and now it intertwines with all of the characters. Cloud and Aerith have their own move set. Cloud and Tifa, Barrett and Tifa, Red 13 and Yuffie. The characters are much more detailed. They have deeper understandings of the world around them, of the story they're in. The story itself has been told in a much more coherent, much more thought-provoking way, if you will. It makes a lot more sense than the original, where it was kind of had this grand idea, but it seemed like it just didn't know how to kind of explain it very well. But in this game, because it's, part two of a trilogy, they get more time to kind of expand on the story itself. The translation is better because of the new story elements that they've added. Then it gives it an opportunity to kind of be a better told story, because it starts implementing things from different games. You've got characters from Crisis Core in it, which weren't in. They were told in the original, but we didn't know who Zach Fair was outside of just being told who he was in the original Final Fantasy VII. Now you get to experience a little bit of what he went through and what he means to Aerith, what he means to Cloud. You get to play as him. And because of Crisis Core, they were able to add these elements in without having to add in the entire game of Crisis Core. And as a player, you can understand who these characters are better, what their relationship to themselves, to their world, to their friends are. And it was a much better expanded world as well. The different regions are expanded upon. You have many more little side quests that really add into the people, the NPCs of the area. Calm is a perfect example. You have this city, this small town that's just outside of Midgar. It's the first place that you go to in the original one once you leave Midgar, but you have no real reason to believe that this is anything other than just a small town outside of Midgar. But you get a much more detailed story behind Calm, who's been militarily occupied by Midgar. But you have these rebels that have experience like Cloud. You get to know deeper understanding of the reunion members, of the former soldier members. You go more into what happens after you've been exposed to so much Mako. You've got you learn about people who helped Tifa on her way to recovery from the Nibelheim incident 5 years ago. The Nibelheim incident, going back to Nibelheim, is completely different than it was before, where they just kind of rebuild the city and pretend like the fire never happened. This one acknowledges that the fire happened, and you have this corporation, Shinra, that's trying to recuperate some good PR by making it a Mako overdose rehabilitation area. And so it's a lot better told story than the original, because they got to get into and explain and go into detail on such an incredible story, which it was already an incredible story, but because of all we've got to experience between the original and this one and now the remake, it just makes that story even better. Not to mention, the Gold Saucer was an incredible area of the game. Chocobo racing was everything I expected and more. It was absolutely phenomenal. It was like Mario Kart on Chocobos, and it's no wonder why they have a standalone Chocobo racing game, because it is an absolute fantastic mini game. The virtual reality aspect of it that they introduced in remake with the VR battles, you're able to do that in the Gold Saucer with the I'm hoping in the third one maybe we get to visit Gold Saucer again and they have the submarine. But with the bikes, with the what's originally the roller coaster, but now you're an actual outer spaceship shooting rockets and stuff like that. The 3D fighter is incredibly well done, where instead of you're just, looks like the punch 'em, rock 'em, sock 'em, punch 'em games, right? Now you're actually in the game in this 3D world, and you have to decipher whether they're going to do an uppercut or an overhand smash. Is it left? Is it right? Uh, it just absolutely fantastic way to put these mini games in, while keeping kin to the original. Not to mention Queen's Blood. Again, Square Enix always comes up with these unbelievably fun and very cool to play mini games. Queen's Blood was an addition on this one that was just absolutely fantastic. I would love a standalone Queen's Blood game. Like I would play that in a heartbeat. It seems like it could be something like a Clash of Clans type, or sorry, yeah, like a Clash of Clans type mobile game, right? Where it's just this very simple card game that you play with others online, because it's very easy to learn, very difficult to master. The Fort Condor stuff comes back, and instead of it just being this 2D looking world where you wait for the enemies to come up and you place these your defenses in certain areas, you're actually in the fight now, right? You're on the battlefield, and you're putting these players in motion. It's just you have special abilities with some of your characters. It was just such a fantastic update to an already great game. Like the OG is still one of my favorite of all time, if not my favorite of all time. But this remake has made me question that, because it is that much better and that much more updated, that much more modern. Not to mention they push the idea of what a traditional RPG is to another to another level, with the ability to not only kind of slow time to a crawl, so you can do the traditional JRPG type menu options, and this character does that and that character does this, but you also have the quick button option, so you have these characters that just on a whim can do whatever you want. The synergy uh, abilities really add another experience to your fighting combinations, along with the limit breaks. You have more limit breaks in it now, where you only had the 2 with each character. In remake, you now have 3. The ability grid is another new way to decipher a way to create the character that you want to create with these people. Now, again, eventually you get to the end where basically every ability is unlocked, but up as you decide to develop your characters, you get a very organic and unique way to do it, as opposed to basically following, once you reach this level, you get this ability. Once you reach this level, you get this ability type of thing. Not to mention, you can also create items now. Very specifically, have to create some items to do the side missions and stuff, which is a very new, another very cool introduction to this game specifically, that makes me think it's going to make its way into the third one and be a very valuable asset to finish out the trilogy. And I really can't say enough about it. Like, it was just an absolutely phenomenal game, and I had very high hopes for this one. And it's not very often that you go into a game with such sky high expectations and they actually live up to those expectations. Most of the time, if you go and you get on that hype train, most of the time you're disappointed, because you're expecting so much out of it that even if it is the best game of the year, it's not going to reach the potential that you and your imagination assumed it was going to reach. But Final Fantasy VII Rebirth did, across the board, in every way I could think of. And I was so happy to have played it. It was, I think, what, 7 years, 5, 6, 7 years between remake and Rebirth, and the hype from remake to this, seeing what it could be, knowing the places we were going to, specifically the Gold Saucer, was just, it was almost too much to bear. And for this game to come out and be as good as it was a pleasant surprise, to say the least. A very pleasant surprise to me. And so that's why this was my favorite game of the year. And yes, maybe of it is a little bit of nostalgia, a little bit of bias to my favorite franchise, one of my all-time favorite games. But again, the truth is, there was so much hype behind this game. There was so much build up to the release of this game, because it had been so long between the two. that, and for it to reach the peak level that it did, really, really emphasized how much I did enjoy this game and how much I liked playing this game. I still pick it up and play it from time to time now. I do have a couple of trophies still left to get, but it's only a matter of time. And the truth is, I could probably just delve right into it and get them all done, but I don't want it to be over, really. I want something to be like a back burner type game that I just continue to experience. And right now, and for the foreseeable future, that is going to be Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, because I enjoy playing it so much. In terms of the gameplay being fun, in terms of the story being great, in terms of just overall loving the Final Fantasy VII world. And it was a fantastic game that should have got more recognition. I understand why it didn't on the Game Awards. Truth is, the Game Awards are a joke. you know, I have this theory that Dragon Age Veilguard was definitely going to be nominated for Game of the Year and probably won Game of the Year, but it did so poorly that they were forced to basically take it off the Game Awards. But I understand why they nominated it, and I'm still holding hope that in a couple of years, when the third and final Final Fantasy VII game comes out, they kind of pull like a Lord of the Rings, where they give all these awards to the third one, with the understanding that they're really giving it to the trilogy as opposed to the one specific game. I don't have a whole lot of faith in the Game Awards, but one can still hold out hope that's going to be the case, because there's no doubt in my mind that this was the best game of the year. But that's just my opinion. You guys let me know what you guys think. What was your favorite game of the year? Comment down below. I'd love to hear everybody's favorite game of this year. And if there's a game that I missed, I know a couple of people have said that their favorite was Silent Hill 2. I do own it. We haven't played it yet. I know a lot of people really like Stellar Blade. I own it. I haven't played it yet. So maybe next year those will qualify for my top 5. But Final Fantasy V, The Devil in Me, Life is Strange 3, True Colors, Black Myth Wukong, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth were my top 5 for this year in 2024. But that's going to do it for this one. BigSweetC, that's me. Wishing YouTube, that's you. Wonderful day, night, morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time of day it might be. As long as you're watching, I'm wishing you a wonderful watching time. Sweetness. Signing off. Peace.